Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic show. This is episode 486. We've got a great special guest. We've got Peter Pednick, CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. We're going to be talking about something that, how to become a thought leader, how to be seen as one of the leading thought leaders in your industry, in your sector, whatever that is. And I thought Peter was the person to ask, because he's been helping people become thought leaders for over 20 years. Peter, would you like to quickly introduce yourself and maybe add a little bit to my not that great introduction on what thought leadership is?
Sure. I'll start by talking about a definition of thought leadership, because I think it's important. People throw around that word all over the place, and it means different things to different people, which is the definition of confusion, right? So if we both were talking about an apple, but you were addressing a dog and I was addressing a piece of fruit, that would lead to confusion. So let me just sort of tell you how I define it. It might not be the perfect definition, but it's the operating definition that we use. So there's sort of two pieces to thought leadership. There is the thoughtful piece. So that's the thought part, right? And by that, I mean that you have to be doing things that are thoughtful. That could be based on research. It could be based on client experience. It could be based on putting together the dots across functions, across industries, across things. But it's not, thought leadership is not copying and pasting and sharing, a pithy quote or something that someone else said. So there's got to be something thoughtful to it. Second piece is the leadership piece, right? So on the leadership side, one is you have to acknowledge that there is a body of work that's out there, and you are just adding to that conversation and leading it in a different direction, leading it into a new place, leading it to the next level. Because if all you're doing, again, is saying what's already been said and summarizing what's already been summarizing and talking about what's already been talking about, it's really not enough. The last thing I would say about that is the term itself. One should never call oneself a thought leader. I think it's a sign of hubris and arrogance, and it's code for I'm a jerk. It should be bestowed upon you by others in your space, in your industry, out of a sign of acknowledgement, respect for the content that you create that's valuable to others.
That was great. Thank you so much, Peter, for that
insightful
intro to the subject. So I've also got my great co-host, Adrian. Adrian, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Hi, everybody. My name is Adrian. I'm the CEO and founder of Groundhog. We produce, sell, and create marketing automation plugins for businesses that use WordPress.
And before we go into the main part of the conversation, I want to mention one of our great sponsors. That's Kinster Hosting. And Kinster's been our major sponsor for almost 3 years now. They've been hosting also the WP-Tonic website. I've been totally blown away by the quality of their hosting and their support and the team in general. So if you've got a membership site, if you've got a e-learning site, a WooCommerce site, a site that needs some extra oomph in the hosting, you cannot choose better for yourself or for your clients, Kinster Hosting. They use the power of Google Cloud to host all the sites. What you get is one of the best customized interfaces with all the bells and whistles. I've got to say, when we're going to go to other clients' websites and support their websites on other hosting providers, and I have to use their interfaces, I just think to myself, I just couldn't go away from Kinster. It's so easy to use. The other great thing is the quality of their support. All their support is top A1 tier support. Everybody in their team knows what they're talking about. If you have a problem, they've always done everything possible to try and help me. I can honestly say that. So if that sounds interesting, go over to Kinster. And the main thing is tell them that you heard about them on the WP-Tonic show. So Peter, So I must be a jerk because I've always said I'm a thought leader. But there we go. So, you know, are you saying that is there no methodology then to help you on the way of thought leadership, or do you just have to publish a lot or be very thoughtful and hope others see your brilliance? How do you push the needle a little bit so others see your brilliance, Peter?
I think the mistake that many folks make is starting without a strategy in mind, right? So you can push out all the content in the world and all the thought leadership in the world, but if it's to the right people and, you know, to the wrong people in the wrong format at the wrong time, who cares? So I think, to me, the first thing is to figure out what is your strategy. And by talking about sort of a thought leadership strategy, I'm talking about, you know, what's your platform, not from a technology perspective, but what is your very, very small area of expertise that you have more expertise on than others, that you are the thought leadership in. So for example, you're not going to be a thought leader in sales. You might be a thought leader in consultative sales for technology companies or something like that, right? It's going to be specific. Then you have to think backwards and say, who are the folks I'm trying to connect with? Who are my avatars? So we always work with our clients and say, let's sketch out 2, 3, maybe 4 client avatars with a very, very, very high level of specificity. Who am I trying to connect to? Then you got to do your homework and say, how do those folks consume content, right? You know, we have a lot of clients that are really smart, they're academics, et cetera, and they're putting out, you know, or we're putting out 30, 40, 50-page white papers that, quite frankly, nobody reads, you know? So you have to figure out how the people you're trying to connect with consume content and make sure you're putting out the content in the format that they enjoy the most. And then you got to figure out where they're getting their information from and get it placed there. So I think a lot of people, what they do is, the fun part of this is producing the thought leadership for many. So they produce a lot of stuff, and they produce it, and they produce it, and they produce it. And either they put it on their own site or social media channels that they control. And, you know, they're talking to the same 20 people, 50 people, 500, 1,000 people day in and day out. The trick is growth. The trick is to find, you know, net new people to come into your universe that are the right people, because you don't want to waste your time or money or energy attracting people that don't look like the people that you want to do business with.
That's great. Over to you, Adrian.
So I guess I'd say that you're a thought leader on helping people become thought leaders.
Very meta, yeah.
What I'd love to know more about, because this has been a 20-year journey for you. And I'd love to know where that journey started. And, you know, so you don't just wake up one day and think, I'm going to be a thought leader and I'm going to help other people become thought leaders. Like, that doesn't happen, right? Or correct me if I'm wrong, but where did it all start for you? Yeah,
so no, I don't think you do that. Although maybe somebody might. So for me, it was really two different sides of me that I realized were not as disconnected as I initially thought they were. So I had always been entrepreneurial from, you know, being a young kid and you know, washing cars and you know, anything sort of entrepreneurial. And then, you know, throughout my 20s, 30s, et cetera, building businesses from scratch, buying businesses, selling businesses, roll-ups, et cetera, et cetera. So always entrepreneurial, right? And when you're an entrepreneur, you're typically under-resourced. You're typically in a little bit over your head. You're typically always, you know, sort of trying to hit the next level, but you look back and go, holy cow, why did I ever think I could achieve that when I wasn't smart enough, didn't have the resources, didn't have the technology, whatever. So always entrepreneurial, and actually did that fairly well. The other side of me was I was always, you know, a content junkie, always a nerd. So I was always reading business books, always reading business magazines. Google that if you don't remember what a magazine was. They used to come in the mail and they were very thick. Always just taking in whatever I could from a content perspective, but never sort of looked at the business side of thought leadership and content, because it just never crossed my mind. And then about 15 plus years ago, I got brought in to do a turnaround at a communication consulting firm. So it was a $60 million firm that's about 40 something years old at the time, based in Australia, had an operation in North America and in Europe, and they were in trouble, right? So we got brought in by the board because it was either something that they were going to shut down, sell, kill, or figure out how to make work. we figured out how to make it work. And what I learned from that business was it was basically a company that did presentation skills. Like, holy cow, this is a company that makes, makes $40 million a year selling content that somebody wrote 40 years ago. That's fascinating. And then from there, I went to work exclusively for a guy named Keith Ferrazzi, who launched a book called Never Eat Alone. And then, fast forward to here we are today. So to me, it's been this, the backstory is really the convergence of, being a solid entrepreneur and being passionate about content, and then merging the two together and going, wow, okay, this is my space in the universe. I think like a consultant, that's the overlap of the two circles in the Venn diagram that is me. So.
Right on.
Cool.
Jonathan?
So we classified what it is. We've delved into a bit of your background, why you got in it. So I think before we go for a break, and then after the break, we need to go into the nitty gritty of how you do it. So if you had let's say you had a client because there's one individual that comes to mind. Let's say you had a client that come to you, and they wanted to there was a particular software, let's say WordPress. They wanted to become a thought leader in WordPress and in the WordPress community. What are some of the first step in building this strategy to world domination of thought leadership in WordPress then, Peter?
I think he's talking about himself, but I can't be sure.
No,
Yeah.
I've not got that Trump, my dear.
Yeah, I think I got that. First off, so there's a couple different levels here. There's content marketing, there's subject matter expertise, and then there's thought leadership. So I would argue that being an expert in WordPress is somewhere between subject matter expert and thought leadership. So I would push back on that and say, WordPress might be too big. Is it the technical? Is it the visual? Is it the graphics? Is it the underlying business? I mean, there's like 10 different things. When you come to me and say, hey, what might you want to know about WordPress? Well, there's like 10 different distinct areas. And I would find it hard to believe that the person that's the technical guru is also the expert in the monetization side, right? So I think it's in the WordPress, is the better question might be, how do I become a thought leader in building workplace businesses for these type of people that do these types of things? Does that make sense?
Oh, I think your insight there was razor sharp. Two individuals that I would say are thought leaders, and one is going to be coming on the show in the near future, and the other has been. Well, they both have been actually. But one I would classify as a friend of the show, but they are aimed at very two. Is Adam from WP Crafter, which has over 150,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. But it's really aimed at the newbie or the person that's finding their legs in the WordPress world. And he's built a really great niche in training people or offering advice. And then the other one is Chris Lemmer, who is kind of seen as the kind of industry, if you're starting a business in the WordPress sector, plugin business, or he's seen as the person that can really advise you on there. So that they've built two very distinct markets there, Peter.
Yeah, so let me first clarify those markets. So where we operate with our clients from a thought leadership perspective is in the B2B space. So we work with content that has value to a business organization, right? It sounds to me, and I could be wrong, that the first gentleman you described is more B2C, somebody looking to start.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So I know nothing about that world. In terms of the B2C, I mean, that's not my playground. When people have content that has a business application, right? Whether it's sales, leadership, marketing, resilience, accountability, on and on and on and on. And they're looking to take that content into small businesses, mid-sized businesses, large businesses, nonprofit, government agencies, et cetera. I'm just quite frankly fearful of the direct-to-consumer model because there's an unknown customer acquisition cost, unknown lifetime value of the customer. It's very marketing heavy, in terms of what needs to happen, the funnels and click funnels and all that. That's not my bailiwick.
Yeah. So Chris Lemon would be more your cup of tea, would he?
Yeah, it sounds as if, yeah.
Yeah, I can actually see you getting on with Chris quite well, actually. We're going to go for our break and we'll be delving into this fascinating world of thought leadership a bit more. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. It's like a lot of things, actually. I see the abilities, the different outlets that you can utilize to build thought leadership have just exploded. Then let's say 4 or 5 years ago, YouTube, there's just different ways you can touch people. But with all this choice can come confusion. Let's hope with Peter's help, we can sharpen our focus. But I'm going to throw it over to my co-host again, Adrian. Off you go.
So there's a large portion of the business community that spends a significant amount of time sharing their opinions and their thoughts and their expertise, quote unquote, on various different platforms and social media and whatnot. Mm-hmm. How do you go, what are the steps that one has to take to really, separate from the crowd, as it were, to cut through the noise so that their knowledge and their insight and their help kind of shines through everybody essentially trying to do the same thing? Is there a process or a specific way that you distribute content, a certain methodology to distributing the content? Or am I just completely off base? So what would you do to help someone kind of who has this content, who has this expertise, who wants to help more people? How would you help them cut through everybody else trying to do exactly the same thing?
Yeah, so I look at it as a continuum, right? So there's steak and then there's sizzle, right? So there's one group of people that have the steak. They've got it, man. Their stuff is just dynamite. And when you read it or look at it or get exposed to it, it's life-changing. It's mind-altering. It does all this other stuff, but it's not delivered with anything, right? Then you have this other group over here that it's all sizzle, but there's no steak. So they're great marketers. Some of these folks, like you mentioned, you look at them and say, how are they ever doing anything that they claim that they're doing when all I see them is they're online 24/7, live streaming.
I'm scrolling through my Facebook feed and I get ads for like 20 different influencers and they're all saying that, they're, helping people create like $20 million businesses a month.
Yeah.
And but if I see you like live streaming, like, 3 times a day and you're running all of these ads, like, where do you find the time? Like, I don't
exactly. Exactly. And why would you sell me all your brilliance for $12 a month? Like it's, some of that.
It does not compute.
It doesn't add up. So I think, a couple of thoughts there. Number one, if you're all steak, meaning, you're just not particularly charismatic, or it's not your style, or you're a little more shy, work on getting a little bit of sizzle. Because people need things delivered with a little bit of sizzle. That's what we want. If you're all sizzle and no steak, good luck. Okay, that's okay.
But essentially, what you're saying is that having supreme quality content is in and of itself an attribute to cutting through that noise.
Yeah, I think ultimately what wins is great content, right? So if I'm a great marketer and I've got all the sizzle, that's fine. You can fool some of the people some of the time, and I think that. Just because everybody can be a publisher, just because everybody can be a broadcaster, just because the cost of creating content is almost zero right now, means that everybody is doing it, that the value for great stuff is actually going through the roof right now. Because, I could Google whatever, build a WordPress site, right? And I can find 80,000 hits on how to do it. 99.9% will be absolute crap, right? But then there'll be that little bit of stuff, like stuff that you guys have, that it's like, wow, that's consistently insightful. It's valuable. It's something that's applicable to me, right? and I want to go back for more. So some of it is about trust. Some of it is about being consistent. And there are no shortcuts, right? Like to consistently produce high caliber thought leadership takes time, energy, and effort. You can't phone it in.
Right. I know, and just as a follow-up, I know a great number of people who I trust with my business, with my money, and with my time to an incredible degree. And yet what they are focused on other things other than the benefit that they have to possibly share on a much larger scale and actually like be a thought leader. And I'm wondering, I'm sure there are a lot more people out there who are consistently sharing their knowledge and helping a significant portion of people, but aren't able to actually monetize that in any way, shape, or form because they either A, don't know that they should be monetizing it, or B, they don't know how to. So how would you typically monetize somebody's insight and expertise into creating a following and creating products and actually turning their mind into money? How does that?
So the first thing goes back to something I said earlier. Who values it the most, right? So you got to go back to the client avatars and do your homework and say, who would assign the most value to my expertise? Mm-hmm. And that's that. And it's sometimes it's not the obvious, right? So, number one, do they have any money? Right? Like, a lot of people, like, this seems like duh, but there's a lot of people creating a lot of stuff. People that are broke putting out content to other people who are broke. That's not a conversation I want any part of. Like, I'm old school. I don't know how to make money from people that don't have money or don't know how to make money. So who does your content provide value to? And I think you need to be honest and be able to sort of do a forensic audit on your content, that says, here's the impact or the outcomes that I know my content has, right? As a result of somebody working with me in whatever manner they choose to, they will do X better, faster, cheaper, quicker. And if you can't sort of do that honestly, you've got a problem, right? So if I always think about it and say, there's some intervention that someone has with your content. What's the before and what's the after? So if you remember the old Jenny Craig commercials, they showed a large person, then they showed images of frozen pizza or whatever the Jenny Craig stuff is, and then they showed time went by, and that large person looks smaller. So clearly the intervention and the takeaway, if you watched it with the sound off, is, okay, large person intervenes with this company, Jenny Craig, they become smaller. Okay, that's the intervention. What's your Jenny Craig, right? So as a result of working with you, will it be I'm going to acquire clients better? Will it be I'm going to negotiate better? Whatever that it is, and then show me the money, prove it.
Right. I'm also interested in, yes, find an avatar, find what they're probably willing to pay or what their value is to you. I'm also interested in the actual product lineup, in how you transfer and how you turn your knowledge into product.
Yeah. So let me talk about that.
Bunch of different ways. Yeah. Go for it.
So I'm not a B2C guy, so I'll talk about it from what I know, which is B2B. So typical model is someone's got a brilliant idea. Maybe that idea lives in a book. Maybe it lives in a keynote. Maybe it lives in a workshop. Maybe it lives in consulting work they do with clients. But they've already done stuff with the idea, and they know it gets aha moments and it works. Mm-hmm. Now the question is, what else can you do with that, right? So again, depending on the avatar, you can take the same idea that lives in a book, that lives in a keynote, lives in whatever, and maybe turn it into a validated assessment tool. People love to learn about themselves, right? Teams love to learn about the teams. Organizations love to learn about the organizations. Now, creating a validated assessment tool takes more money, costs more money, takes more time than writing up some silly questionnaire and answer these 10 questions, and it's going to pretend to give you some insight into your psyche or something. I mean, there's a scientific methodology and process that you need to adhere to do it, because what an assessment does is it measures something. So the reason I always use the same ruler is I know it's 12 inches, and every time I measure something, it inches and inches and inches and inch. When you have non-validated instruments that people put out in the market all the time, it's not measuring anything, right? Like, it might measure my feelings one day and someday, it's not a consistent measurement. So validated assessment tools are one. Turning the content into things that don't require you to be in the same room with your content for dollars to change hands. So the curse of the expert is, hey, I've been doing what I'm doing for a long, long time, so get me in front of somebody and I can do it. Okay, well, that's great, but that's a limited monetization path in terms of
there's only 24 hours in the day, and there's only 365 days in the year, and you're only going to live for 80 to 90 of those.
Yeah, well, exactly. And ultimately, there's only 3 ways to make money with
So
content.
that's been in these strange days. That's been a bit optimistic, actually.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. But there's, ultimately when you boil it down to its essence, there's only 3 ways to make money with your content. You do more of what you're doing, right? You do more of what you're doing at a higher price point. You're able to move up market. Again, that limits to the 24 hours in the day. And ultimately, you have to digitize and scale it, where the content is an asset that is generating dividends and revenue, not dependent on you. So again, assessment tools, video-based learning, consulting tools, licensing. Thought leadership is a global business. So just because you're living in Toronto or I'm in New York and Jonathan's in Nevada, doesn't mean that the stuff that we create doesn't have value to someone in Singapore, Brazil, London, etc. Right? And I think oftentimes people are too myopic in their thinking and thinking, wait a minute, who could I help globally? If there's evidence that it works on a universal basis. And there's some nuances there, not everything translates well, et cetera, but more often than not, you can find a global audience if you look hard.
That's great. I think I'm going to wrap it up for the podcast part of the show. Goes quick, doesn't it, Pete?
Yeah.
But hopefully Pete has agreed to stay on, and we've got some more interesting questions to ask. Obviously, I'm in the e-learning building membership and e-learning experiences for all my clients, and I get asked all the time, how do I get an audience for my course? And well, you need to be a thought leader, don't you? That's the first thing I say to them. So we're going to be discussing that in the bonus content. So Peter, how can people find out more about you, what you're up to, and your thought leadership?
Sure. So you can send me an email directly at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. You go to the website, thoughtleadershipleverage.com, and then, all the typical, Twitter, LinkedIn, et cetera. And then we also have a podcast as well, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership.
That's great.
You can find me at any of those places.
Adrian, how can people find out more about you and what you are up to?
Anybody looking to get some expertise and some help with their digital marketing and their email marketing, you can go to groundhogwith2gs.io, pick up our plugin, which will help you build great sales funnels and work and create B2B sales, B2C sales, and all of that good stuff. That's groundhogwith2gs.io.
And my beloved, the WP-Tonic tribe, if you really want to support the show, and I know you want to support the show, go over to the WP-Tonic website and sign up for our monthly newsletter. It's been revigorated. It's going to have loads of WordPress and also e-learning information tips, the plugins we recommend on the Friday roundtable show. It's packed, and you can also win a prize. Anybody that joins you in the month, I'll be announcing the first winner tomorrow live on the show. That's if Facebook is working, unlike today. I'll be announcing the first winner, and anybody joining in the coming months, I will be choosing one every month, and they will be winning a prize of about $100 or more, depending how generous my sponsors are. We'll be back next week with another great thought leader like Peter. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye. So I think it was a fascinating discussion during the podcast part, Pete. I think we gave some broad about, because it can be seen as, you're going to give a very mechanical, you do A, B, and that will lead to D, whatever. But also, because I'm in the e-learning, I nichified about two and a half years ago, and it made an enormous difference to my business. So we build membership websites for thought leaders, for people that want to make money from their experience and knowledge. And I always have this conversation with about, I would say, 80% of the people that hire us to build out a platform for them is that they say, how do I get my first 100 students, my first 100 sign-ups? And I say, well, are you a thought leader in your, have you been seeding the seeds of influence, I put it? And 50% say they have actually, but they're not actually understood that's what they were doing. And then unfortunately I've got 50% that haven't. How, can you actually build influence in a kind of 6 to 1 year period? Can you accelerate the process?
Can you? Well, yeah. I mean, I think the answer is yes. Again, I'm not a B2C guy, right?
No,
I'm a B2B guy.
This is business to business. They might be wanting to,
Yeah. So I think the issue is you can either do bottom up or top down. I'd prefer top down. So not all relationships are created equal. I would say if this is my content, whatever it is, right? Who else is sort of not a direct competitor, Coke, Pepsi, but who else are influencing the people that I want to influence that we're not direct competitors to? And how do I build a rapport, a relationship in a generous way with other folks? And why do I want to do that? Well, those other folks have already built a tribe of folks that look like the folks that I want to work with, right? So I would start there as opposed to, to get 1,000 people or 100 people, you might need to touch, 50,000 individuals to get them to convert to be clients. I'd rather find 10 people that each have 5,000 followers or whatever the math is, and really work those relationships in a more genuine, intimate, one-on-one way. That would be how I would go about it.
It's funny you bring that up because that was exactly my strategy when not necessarily to become a thought leader, but to build my plugin businesses. I went out to other people who created successful plugins and I joined their Facebook groups and I became their friends and they promoted my product as a result. And I mean, I promoted theirs, although my audience was significantly smaller, but whatever. But you got to
work harder early on, right?
Yeah,
so you have to work harder. So I can tell you that when we work with our clients, when they're putting a book out in the market, if it's a client that isn't a brand name yet, they're not a multiple New York Times bestseller, they're earlier in the game. One of the things that we'll do is work with them to get testimonials from well-known authors, right? To say, I'm writing a book. And it's not just the testimonial that says, blah, 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 author says this is a great book. It's then going back to that person when we launch the book and saying, hey, remember you gave me that testimonial back in the spring? Well, it's now the fall. Can you help me promote this? And here's a bunch of things. You got to do the work for them to, we're launching this book on such and such a date. Can you let your folks know about it too? Because I think they benefit from it. And, in the world of books, just because I read Jonathan's book doesn't mean I wouldn't read Adrian's book, right? So that's a similar strategy, when trying to get a book out as it would be for, a e-learning program.
That's actually what you said before, though, is really great insight. You have to do all the work, right? You have to make it just extremely easy to let people help you. If you make helping you difficult, you're not going to get very far in building profitable relationships with like-minded individuals. You have to make it.
Well, and I think that's
unless you're the big
1,000%.
fish, right?
Right. So there's 2 emails you can send someone that already gave you a testimonial. Hey, my book's coming out on such and such a date. Could you promote it? They might, they could, maybe. Basically what you said to them is there's a bunch of work I'd like you to do for me for free. The other one is, here's a very detailed email. The book is coming out on the 7th of September. Here's 5 tweets. Pick 2 that you like. I'd like you to put them out twice a day. Here's something for instance, like cut, paste. It'll take you 30 seconds and I'll be forever in your debt, and I'd really appreciate it. Which one's going to get the response? Like, we're all busy. And I think sometimes people forget, just because you're busy, don't make your work my problem.
Right. Exactly. Do as much work as you can in order to just make helping you as easy as possible.
Yep.
So where does podcasting fit into this, Peter?
So podcasting, I think, is really, really interesting right now. So one is, why do a podcast? right? So I think there's lots of reasons. One, you want to hear yourself talk. That's probably not my reason. It's a way to build
you speak for yourself, Peter.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, exactly. No, but so the question would be, why would you do a podcast? Right. To me, it's only a couple of reasons. One is to build the brand and build the awareness. And by the way, podcasting is a medium where thought leadership is deployed. And people sometimes think thought leadership is only a book. It's like, wait a minute, when I'm at the gym for 20 minutes, what am I listening to? It's content, it's thought leadership. And why do I go to the same ones? My time is my scarcest resource. So if I'm going to give you 20 minutes of my time by listening to your podcast, you better give me something. You better either entertain me, give me insight, give me some knowledge that I can use to apply to my personal life or my business life, etc. So number one, podcasting is a great way to build a brand. Number two, it's a great way to develop a reputation and a relationship. And we were just talking about, building community and working with others that are in your space. Have them on as a guest. Be a guest on a podcast. Get yourself, if you're new in a specific space, go out and be a guest. Start a podcast. Get people on it. It's a great way to develop a relationship and rapport with people that probably wouldn't talk to you if you didn't have the microphone, right? So there's two calls I can make to Jonathan. Hey, Jonathan, it's Peter, and I'd like to sell you some consulting services. I'm really good at what I do. I roll. Or, hey, Jonathan, I got this podcast, and by the way, I've had some world-renowned people on it. We've done several hundred episodes. Here's 5 people that, that I know he would admire. Would that be of interest to you? Which call do you think he'd take?
To wrap up, obviously we're living through this virus. I already know a couple of people that kind of built their reputation in WordPress by going to a number of WordPress conferences. They're called WordCamps.
Yeah.
And I know, and now, do you think there's going to be long-term consequences? Because
1,000%.
One of the arrows in building influence, becoming a thought leader, was going to conferences, being a speaker. Do you think there's going to be long-term consequences after we recover from the present situation?
So I think yes, but it depends on how we're defining long-term. My take, and I'm just one individual, most of my clients speak professionally, some of the time or most of the time. So it's a significant piece of what they do for many of them. I think the speaking business, being a paid speaker or even a non-paid speaker in front of a live audience, et cetera, pretty much for the rest of this calendar year is probably over, right? Because even if things come back to normal, whatever that is, the new normal in September, I don't want to be the first guy jumping on a plane to go to Las Vegas in October to be with 5,000 people in a crowd. That's me. And I think we're underestimating the emotional. I mean, I'm someone that typically flies 150,000 miles a year, whatever. I think there's going to be an emotional piece for people of a fear of being in crowds. I think there's going to be, do I really need to get on that flight? Is it, I think and an economic and financial piece. There's a huge economic piece. So to me, I think for this year, that business is done. I don't know what it's going to look like next year or the year after. It is not going to come back to what it was. And by the way, what it was, let's not kid ourselves, for the last 8 years has been phenomenal. The whole, conference world has been better than it's ever been the last 8 years. I don't know how long it takes us to get back there. That being said, you can either take that and say, oh my God, the world is over, or, okay, does that mean that people don't want to get great information from smart people? Absolutely not. You're going to have to figure out just another way to connect from A to B, because why did we go to these conferences? Because in 2 days, I can be with 500 people that are like-minded, that are in my community, that I can learn from. Okay, well, if I just can't do it in person, how else am I going to do it? It's going to look like this. It's going to, it's going to look like lots of other things, but I think you need to be creative and figure out, people want the connection. People want, in 2-3 weeks of this COVID thing, we're having Zoom cocktail parties on a frequent basis. Like, that's pretty cool.
So what is the effective substitute that you find, at least for B2B people who potentially were doing a lot of speaking stuff? What is the effective substitute in the meantime? Because they can't just wait. If they wait until this is over, then
right. So we're starting to see some of that.
Yeah.
So I think if you dissect the reason you go to any conference, to me, there's only 3 variables. One might be the location, but that's typically not so much, unless you've never been to Palm Springs or, it's your first time, whatever. So location and,
Well,
it's a 5-star hotel.
That normally it's close to you. I might not go to it, but being it's conveniently situated, I'll make the effort to go,
So geography would be one variable. Is it convenient? Is it an expensive place to go? Or is it a place I haven't been? Whatever. The other two, which are the primary ones, in my opinion, is the content. What's the information I'm getting? And community, right? So sometimes you get way more value at the breaks, at the cocktail party, at the dinners, because it's the only time, Adrian, that you and I get to be together face to face. We're online all the time, and we get to have dinner once or twice a year, and that's important.
I usually find it's the bar conversations that I always get the most value from. What you do is you go to the talk, and you get your nugget, and then you go to the bar, and then you talk with other people about how that nugget is actually valuable and how to apply it and all of these things, which you don't learn at the talk. So I always find that it's those conversations that hold the most value anyway.
Right. So I think, again, if we break that apart, content is content, right? And I think you just need to be creative in terms of how do I deliver it effectively when we're not in the room together? I can do that. We know what e-learning is. We know what webinars are. We know what interact, and by the way, the technology is finally at a place where it's stable, because unlike in 2008 or previous times or we've had interruptions, quite frankly, up until, and I don't have a relationship with Zoom, but up until Zoom, the technology sucked. Every time you get on a call, you have to download something and somebody's 5 minutes late and it dropped. Like, we've got this technology, so it's almost like we don't have to think about the technology now. We click, I see your faces, we can interact and we can talk. I think the part that's going to be more challenging for folks is how do you recreate the bar, meaning that sense of community, that sense of connection, the sense of just chatting about in various ways. And I think people are figuring that out, quite frankly.
Do you have experience with setting up digital communities? I run a Facebook community, a Facebook digital community, which is my attempt at recreating the bar. I know a lot of people are doing it with Slack. Are you seeing any of the people that you work with kind of adopting these models, and are you seeing those work well?
Yeah, Zoom again has breakout rooms to do things. Zoom, because one of the things that we know is most effective in adult learning is peer-to-peer learning, right? So part of this is, any good facilitator, any good teacher knows nobody wants to listen to you for an hour. So how do you put out a little bit of nugget, a little bit of knowledge, and say, why don't you two blah, 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 do something about that? And it's the peer-to-peer piece. What does that mean to you, Jonathan? What does that mean to you, Adrian? Okay, I'm going to leave you two alone. Go talk about how you might apply this in your business. So it's the peer-to-peer piece and the interactivity and knowing the right mix of, if I'm just delivering straight up information, okay, well, before a live session like this, I can send some things in advance. Read these 3 things, which are language definitions, frameworks, so that when we use that human to human time together, we're taking advantage of what humans do best, which is share knowledge, which is read each other's body language, which is, connect and communicate. And I think the line between when we're in class, and when we're socializing, that whole conference experience is going to have to get blended. And I also think that somebody made up a rule that learning has to suck and not be fun, that we can add some fun to the experience to make up for the bar time that we're missing.
Yeah. I think one of the most successful combinations that I've seen as far as digital community goes and kind of transferring your in-person conference vibe to a digital, relocated elsewhere in the world vibe is having 3 pillars. One is the face-to-face time, which is kind of getting everybody on a Zoom call for half an hour. I don't know if you have a large community or a small community. Maybe you want to do a webinar, but just having face-to-face time where you can just see everybody and broadcast your thoughts verbally, coupled with a digital community that's purely text-based, either Slack or Facebook.
Yep.
And then you need to have, of course, the third pillar, which is just your static content, which is your downloadables or your blog or your podcast or stuff like that. I've seen, Lifter LMS does that, very successful thought leader in the LMS space. And I do that to some extent, not nearly as successful. Jonathan does that. So I think those are the 3 pillars that one needs right now. And I don't know.
And here's where I think where that becomes the equalizer. So we talked about before some people that are all sizzle and no steak.
Yeah.
So when you're in a keynote environment and somebody comes out, there's theatrics to that. And there's all, there's loud music, whatever. Throw that out the window. You peel away all that and you realize, okay, you can't, think about what makes a great keynote: stage presence, charisma, whatever. You do that too much on a Zoom, you're going to give me a headache, right?
Yeah.
Like, take it down a notch, connect with me. Let's have a conversation. I don't need you to be bombastic and overboard and we're going to walk on coals after that. And when you take away sort of the packaging, if you will, and there's no there from a thought leadership content perspective, they're going to be left standing naked, basically.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
My 2 cents. So
I think we're going to wrap it up. And Peter, thank you for your time. I think it's been a fabulous discussion. Hopefully next week I've lined up some really great thought leaders in the next 4 or 5 weeks. I'm going to even surprise Adrian by the quality of guests. Bit like Peter, really, that we're having coming on the show. And we'll be back next week, folks. See you soon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.